On June 23, 1943, an accidental fire destroyed a U.S. Army airfield in New Mexico. Within an hour, the entire auxiliary field was a black scar. The culprit was a secret bat bomb program. Harvard chemist Louis Fieser had armed 6 bats with incendiaries for a photo session, but the creatures woke too fast and set the base ablaze. But the story of the bat bomb began 2 years earlier, in January 1942. In January of 1942, just weeks after Pearl Harbor, a Pennsylvania dentist and part-time inventor named Lytle Adams wrote directly to President Franklin Roosevelt. His proposal was unlike anything the White House had ever seen. Adams suggested loading millions of bats with tiny incendiary bombs and releasing them over Japanese cities from aircraft. The animals would roost in the paper and wood buildings of the enemy's industrial heartland. When the timers fired, hundreds of thousands of simultaneous blazes would overwhelm any fire department. Roosevelt read the letter, scribbled a note in the margin, and forwarded it to his intelligence chief, Colonel William Donovan. The president's notation read, "This man is not a nut. It sounds like a perfectly wild idea, but is worth looking into." That single memo, stamped with the White House letterhead and marked secret, gave the bat bomb its first fragile foothold inside the American war machine. From the White House, Adams's plan traveled to the National Defense Research Committee and then to the Army's Chemical Warfare Service. On May 18, 1942, a Captain William Wiles reviewed the proposal and rejected it in a single dismissive paragraph. The bats would suffocate, he argued, and the cold temperatures at bombing altitude would kill them. The suggestion was returned as impractical, but Lytle Adams refused to accept defeat. He fired off a detailed rebuttal, addressing each objection point by point, and pressed his contacts inside the National Inventors Council to keep the file open. His persistence paid off. The Chemical Warfare Service granted him a temporary reprieve and agreed to hear him out at a formal meeting at Aberdeen, Maryland. The first members to arrive included a young bat biologist named Jack C. von Blücher, Jr. 2 brothers from Pennsylvania, Bobby Harold and Eddie Harold, also joined, along with a Marine Corps private fresh from boot camp named Harry J. Fletcher. In mid-July of 1942, Cooper was checking bat roosts around Los Angeles when he reached into a crack in an old church belfry in Pasadena. Instead of the small, free-tailed bat he expected, his fingers closed around fur and were immediately seized by powerful jaws. He pulled out a mastiff bat, the largest flying mammal in North America, with a wingspan of nearly 2 feet and a face so grotesque it seemed dreamed up by a medieval illustrator. Cooper named the creature Flamethrower and began training it as a living prop for Adams's presentations to skeptical military brass. The demonstration took place in a guarded hangar in Riverside, with visiting generals seated in the front row. Adams called for Cooper, who shook Flamethrower from his sleeve and launched him into the air, a tiny model soldier strapped to the bat's back with rubber bands, aiming a toy bazooka. The bright lights disoriented the bat, and after several circuits he attempted to perch on a fluorescent fixture, slipped, and came down fluttering directly onto the head of a ranking general. A captain leaped up and began swatting at his superior's head with a rolled newspaper. Cooper grabbed his pet, blood spurting from a fresh bite wound, and the room dissolved into chaos. Despite the farcical demonstration, the project needed hard data, not theater. The team arranged for use of the giant dirigible hangar at Moffett Field near Sunnyvale, a cavernous space where bats could fly freely under controlled conditions. Cooper, Fletcher, and Williams climbed to the narrow catwalks near the ceiling, while Adams, von Blücher, and the Harold brothers waited on the concrete floor far below. The bats, fresh from Carlsbad caverns, were fitted with small surgical clips carrying weights far heavier than the payload scientists had believed possible. Enjoying the story? Subscribe to join us for the next one. The first bats launched into the hangar's vast interior, their translucent wings backlit by naked bulbs, and flew almost as if unencumbered. Over repeated trials, the team increased the weights until a bat carrying 25 grams spun down on collapsed wings into von Blücher's hoop net, unhurt. The conclusion was decisive. A free-tailed bat in prime condition could carry between 15 and 18 grams, more than 3 times the estimate from the Harvard biologist who had initially dismissed the idea. This discovery gave Fieser the design parameters he needed to build an incendiary that could actually work. These early successes came with a practical problem: the team's makeshift authority. Cooper and von Blücher, both wearing sergeant's stripes assigned by Adams without official sanction, had already been arrested once by military police who took them for deserters. The humiliation at Fort MacArthur's stockade taught von Blücher a lesson. He sat down at his desk in the museum lab, still smelling of tobacco and moth crystals, and composed a single-page letter on confidential stationery. The letter declared that the bearer was engaged in a highly secret military project under General Hap Arnold himself, and that his method of travel, attire, and location were not to be challenged. Von Blücher signed it with his self-assigned rank, Master Technical Sergeant Acting, and gave copies to every member of the team. It never failed. From that day forward, Kuffer and the others could move through military checkpoints, bypass questioning officers, and operate anywhere in the western states without a shred of legitimate orders. They had become, in effect, the most unaccountable free agents in the entire Army Air Forces. By September 1942, the Bat unit had left Los Angeles and pointed Lytle Adams's old Buick sedan east toward Texas. The team had heard rumors of bat caves in the limestone country west of San Antonio, but the first cavern they tried nearly killed them. It was called Devil's Sinkhole, a circular pit 200 feet deep with a single rotten ladder nailed to 2x4 rails. Harry Fletcher volunteered to go first, stepping onto rungs that creaked and crumbled under his weight. At the bottom of the ladder, where rungs had rotted away, he jumped the remaining 8 feet and landed on a slope of boulders and bones. Jack Kuffer followed, tearing his clothes and flesh on nails and broken wood as he slid through the gap. Far below, guano lay ankle-deep, and the walls of the dome were pockmarked with small holes, but the bats they needed were not there. The great colony had either migrated or never lived in this pit at all. The real ordeal began when they tried to climb out. The rope the team had looped around the Buick's bumper could not lift a man straight up because the ladder hung in 3 long zigzags while the rope fell perpendicular. Kuffer found himself dangling in space, spinning 30 feet above the broken ladder with no way to reach it. Fletcher scrambled up the guano slope, grabbed the trailing rope end, and began swinging Kuffer like a pendulum toward the ladder. After several near misses and bloody fingers, Kuffer caught hold. Then it was Fletcher's turn. He tied himself into the rope, ran off the peak of the debris cone, and launched himself into a swinging arc. Twice he missed the ladder. On the 3rd try, he crashed into it, grabbed hold, and climbed. Back on solid ground, exhausted and trembling, they sat on the boulders and passed a bottle of bourbon. Devil's Sinkhole had given them nothing but fear, but the rumor of millions of bats still pulled them east toward Bandera, Texas. In Bandera, Adams found the man they had been told to contact, Emil Rug, a wiry guano miner who held leases on most of the large bat caves in Texas. Rug's overalls were crusted with the fine brown pellets of bat droppings, and his pickup truck smelled like the inside of a cave. He listened to Adams's plan, the bats, the tiny incendiaries, the release from airplanes over Japanese cities, and without hesitation agreed to help. That evening, Rug drove the team to Ney Cave on the ranch of Ben Gerdis. As the sun set, the bats began to emerge, first a trickle, then a stream 20 feet thick, then a black river that flowed into the sky without pause for 3 hours. Ney Cave alone held millions upon millions of Mexican free-tailed bats. No one knew the exact count, but it was the richest colony any of them had ever seen. Rug took them also to Bracken Cave, where the colony was even larger. Here, finally, were the numbers Adams had promised the Army Air Forces he could deliver. Back in Los Angeles, von Blücher set about solving the next problem. No one on the team knew how to force a bat into hibernation and bring it out alive on command. Von Blücher found his man at the University of Southern California, a freshly minted doctor of physiology named Osro Wiswell. Wiswell had just finished a thesis on suspended metabolism in small mammals. When Adams met him, he offered the rank of Master Sergeant, acting, and a laboratory in a secret war project. Wiswell hesitated. He wanted a medical career, not bat research, but Adams's combination of patriotic persuasion and the forged authority of the letter from von Blücher won him over. By late 1942, the bat unit had its source of bats in the Texas caverns, its physiologist, and a growing sense that the fantastical plan might actually work. In the spring of 1943, Lytle Adams sat in a barber's chair flipping through old magazines when he stopped at a 6-month-old issue of Harper's. The article described Osaka Bay's industrial crescent, a dense tangle of paper, bamboo, and timber factories housing half of Japan's heavy industry. The city's fire department, the authors noted, had trained to fight only 2 simultaneous blazes. Adams read the passage aloud to anyone who would listen, his eyes wet with emotion. He saw it as a mandate. Bat bombs could turn that single fire limitation into a national catastrophe. Not long after, Adams acquired a new driver and bodyguard, Patricio Patsy Batista, a former enforcer for Al Capone who had been assigned to him during a visit to Washington. Patsy's streetwise manner and complete loyalty made him a natural addition to the team. The first real test came in mid-May at Muroc Dry Lake in the California desert. A B-25 bomber climbed to altitude with a cargo of chilled bats packed inside a cardboard container designed by Adams. When the bombardier released the shell, the slipstream tore it apart before the parachute could deploy. Bats and shredded paper scattered across the empty lake bed. No one was hurt, but the failure was complete. The chemists and the bat team stood on the white clay watching fragments drift down and said nothing. Adams took the wreckage back to the Crosby Brothers machine shop beneath the Del Mar racetrack grandstands. Out of the cardboard failure came a 5-foot steel canister with tail fins, a barometric altimeter, and a parachute packed into its nose. Inside, 26 circular trays stacked like egg crates, each holding 40 bats suspended head down above tiny cubicles. When the altimeter triggered the chute, the shell split open and the trays separated on 3-inch tethers. A wire running through each bomb pulled the safety pin as the bat fell onto the tray below its launching platform. The first full-scale test was rescheduled for June at Carlsbad, New Mexico. On the morning of June 23, 1943, a B-25 lifted off from Carlsbad Army Airfield. It was piloted by Lieutenant Tim Holt, a Hollywood actor who had earned his bombardier's wings in standard training and carried a steel canister bolted into its bomb bay. The target was a newly built auxiliary field, still unoccupied. From the ground, the team watched the shell fall. A black dot against the high desert sky. At 4,000 feet, the parachute cracked open. The steel casing split along its seams, and a column of trays descended like an accordion. Bats fluttered away in all directions, their dummy bombs still attached. The container worked exactly as designed. Then Louis Fieser, the Harvard chemist who had invented napalm, called for a photographic session. He wanted footage of armed bombs attached to live bats. Fieser personally injected copper chloride into the pencil-sized timers of 6 capsules, setting each to ignite in exactly 15 minutes. He handed the bats to the photographers. The animals had been chilled, but the desert heat revived them faster than anyone expected. Before the cameras could roll, all 6 bats shook off their torpor and flew straight into the empty buildings surrounding the airstrip. 15 minutes later, smoke rose from the barracks. The control tower erupted into a torch visible for miles. Hangars caught fire in perfect sequence, each ignition matching the staggered timer settings Fieser had used. Within an hour, the entire auxiliary field was a black scar. The base commander arrived with 3 fire engines only to find the gates padlocked and a lieutenant colonel from Chemical Warfare Service refusing him entry. There was nothing left to save. The team spent the next day bulldozing the charred wreckage into pits, burying any trace of what had caused the fire. High-altitude tests later that week proved bats could survive the pressure and oxygen levels of a flight at 25,000 feet. The incendiary worked. It worked too well. Back in Washington, Fieser moved first. Through his contact, Warren Lothrop at the Office of Scientific Research and Development, he sent a string of memoranda describing the Carlsbad fire as evidence that the bat plan was impractical. He wrote that bats were harder to catch than expected, more delicate, and difficult to rouse from hibernation, claims that contradicted his own role in the accident. The Chemical Warfare Service and several Air Force officers, wary of another catastrophe, recommended cancellation. The project did not die. Lytle Adams flew to Washington and argued that the Carlsbad fire had proven exactly what the military needed to know. The bat bomb could start fires in inaccessible places with reliable timing. He found allies in the Marine Corps Observer who had watched the test in silence, General Louis de Haven, and in enough senior officers to keep the plan alive. The Army Air Forces authorized a new round of experiments under a formal code name. Project X-Ray was now an official, classified military research program. While the paperwork settled, a young bat expert named Denny Constantine was discovered hitchhiking through Carlsbad caverns on a solo tour of American bat caves. Harry Fletcher and the team member named Williams found him at the cavern entrance at dusk, watching the evening exodus with the intensity of a true believer. They brought him back to Los Angeles. Adams enrolled him in school nearby and added him to the project's reserve roster. Constantine had already studied how long free-tailed bats took to enter torpor and how fast they revived, exactly the data the hibernation experiments still lacked. The pieces were in place, but the clock was running. By September 1943, the Bat Unit had formally expanded its long-standing footprint in Bandera, consolidating full-time in the clapboard buildings clustered around the OST Cafe. With a formal budget and military liaison officers now in place, the team finally had the logistical backing to conduct large-scale experiments. The Bandera base hummed with activity. Steel canisters from the Crosby Brothers machine shop were stockpiled in a converted barn. Patsy Batista, who had joined the unit as Adams's personal driver months earlier, kept the mood light with his irreverent spirit. He drove a battered olive-drab sedan and kept the mood light despite the mounting scientific pressure. In November, the team moved to Dugway Proving Ground in Utah for the critical hibernation experiments. Osro Wiswell, the physiologist, set up a cold chamber to test how long free-tailed bats could be kept in torpor and how quickly they could be revived. The results were disappointing. Bats held at low temperatures for more than a few days lost physical condition and could not carry their incendiary loads when awakened. Tensions that had been building for months finally erupted one evening in the Dugway mess hall over a disagreement that no one later remembered clearly. The argument escalated into a fistfight between von Blücher and the project's youngest member, Jack Kufer, leaving a table overturned and a panel of the mess hall wall cracked. The scarred panel remained as a silent reminder of the frustrations that now plagued the project. In December, the team conducted a final full-scale test at El Centro, California, using improved steel containers with reinforced parachute deployment. Tim Holt flew the B-25, releasing a canister over the desert. The shells split cleanly, the trays separated, and the bats dispersed with dummy bombs attached. The mechanics worked, but the operational problems of hibernation and mass production remained unresolved. The El Centro test proved the concept was technically sound. However, the military evaluators noted that the bats required careful handling, short transport times, and precise temperature control. Against the backdrop of the escalating Pacific War, where conventional incendiaries were becoming more effective, the bat bomb's window of opportunity was closing. In February 1944, the Army Air Forces and the Chemical Warfare Service issued a joint directive canceling Project WWII. The official reason cited unresolved hibernation issues, the logistical complexity of arming millions of bats, and the availability of more reliable incendiary bombs. Adams received the news in Bandera, surrounded by his unfulfilled blueprints and empty canisters. The team disbanded. Kufer was reassigned to other duties, Fletcher returned to the Marine Corps, and the Herold brothers returned to civilian life. Von Blücher shipped out to the Pacific, assigned to an infantry division bound for the Pacific. Pfizer returned to Harvard, his napalm becoming the standard for area bombing. Emil Roux went back to his guano mines, the silent millions of bats in Bracken Cave undisturbed for another generation. Adams reluctantly closed the Bandera base and drove back to Los Angeles, his dented briefcase still filled with the original proposal that had once captivated President Roosevelt. The bat bomb would never be used. Project X-Ray belongs to the long history of wartime inventions that seemed brilliant on paper, but could not survive the transition to reality. The idea itself was not foolish. The Carlsbad fire had proven that a bat-delivered incendiary could start a conflagration with reliable precision. But the practical obstacles of biology, logistics, and timing proved insurmountable. The scientists and soldiers who worked on it returned to other duties, and the bats of Ney Cave continued their evening flights undisturbed. If you have any family stories from World War II, tales of oddball projects, ingenious gadgets, or the quiet humor that kept men going, please share them in the comments below. We read every one. And if you enjoyed this look at one of the war's strangest secrets, consider subscribing and leaving a like to support our future historical documentaries. Thank you for listening.